This is part 3. Tonight we were recording part 3 of our series Logic Saves Lives, which focuses on, yes, logic and logical fallacies. Tonight is the first show that we are really devoting to a specific fallacy, the appeal to authority, or argumentum ad veracundium in Latin.
And let's see how that goes.
Science of logic. It's a little overwhelming at first. Here's the definition. Your logical fallacy is an appeal to authority. If you used the opinion or position of an authority figure or institution of authority in place of an actual argument. It is important to note with this fallacy that authorities in given fields may very well have valid arguments, and that one should not dismiss another's experience and expertise. To form an argument, however, one must defend it on its merits, i.e. know why the person in authority holds that particular position that they do. It is, of course, entirely possible. It is, of course, entirely possible that the opinion of a person or institution in authority is wrong. Therefore, authority, the authority that such person or institution holds does not have any intrinsic bearing upon whether the claims are true or not. This is a series about logical fallacies. Before we get into the actual book, which we will do plenty of tonight, I just want to flesh out this idea of the irrelevant appeal to authority. Now, there's, appeal to a biased authority, appeal to the wrong authority. This has several forms, but tonight we're focusing on the irrelevant appeal to authority, a subcategory of the argument ad veracundium. And this is a type of genetic fallacy attempting to judge a belief by its origin rather than by arguments for and against the belief. So that's a genetic fallacy. Something is good or bad based on where it comes from. It's become very popular in this country in the last decade. We're on of the argumentum ad veracundium, the appeal to authority. Now, there's little examples of this, little fun examples, like Bob has questions about evolution.
Right.
Or Bob doesn't like the idea that people have questions about evolution. So he says that he knows a scientist who also questions evolution. That's an appeal to authority.
Right.
But, oh, Larkin, it gets so much worse than that, doesn't it?
Absolutely. To me, one of the biggest giveaways that somebody's doing the appeal to authority routine is, I'll start a discussion and they'll quote somebody saying something, and I'll say, okay, that's fine, but how does that apply to this? Or what about this exception? Or what about this? And they say, well, I don't know. Ask the guy I just quoted, which shows me they don't understand things. They're not thinking things out. They remembered something that somebody else said. Right. And if all they can do is quote the other person, and they can't, they can't even respond to any sort of cross-examination or objective analysis of the actual quote, it's obvious that they're trying to do that cop-out. I think the reason people do appeal to authority is it's a really convenient cop-out because, hey, it's not me. Don't argue about me. I'm quoting somebody else, so go argue with him. And I don't have to, I don't have to argue anything or prove anything or have any thought involved. I can just quote somebody who says something I like.
People also frequently use it to not just to bolster their own opinion, but to tear yours down. Like, well, you know, I think my pastor knows a little bit more about evolution than you. So,
right? Yeah, they'll use like the rank of the authority of the person they're quoting, as if, ha ha ha, you think you could know something that he doesn't.
Yeah,
and again, it comes down to, you know, if the authority is actually right about something, then evidence and logic will back him up. It'll match. You know, if what he's saying is the truth, then you can demonstrate it by evidence and logic. To say, well, I don't have to rationalize anything or show any evidence because this important guy said it.
Yeah.
It's just the ultimate intellectual cop-out. Like, no matter how complicated it is, if the guy is right, and no matter how, you know, important he is and how many credentials he has, if he's right, then somewhere there must be some evidence and logic backing up what he has to say. And if you don't have that, if you just have a quote from some important guy, then you have nothing. And this is how the book starts, so this isn't like giving away the end of an exciting story or something. It starts with the punchline.
Right.
Starts as follows. How many millions have gazed upon the brutal horrors of history with its countless examples of man's inhumanity to man and wondered aloud how such things could happen? The truth is, most people wouldn't want to know how it happens because they themselves are religiously attached to the very belief that makes it possible. The vast majority of suffering and injustice in the world, today and spanning back thousands of years, can be directly attributed to a single idea. It is not greed or hatred or any of the other emotions or ideas that are usually blamed for the evils of society. Instead, most of the violence, theft, assault, and murder in the world is the result of a mere superstition, a belief which, though almost universally held, runs contrary to all evidence and reason, though of course those who hold the belief do not see it that way. The punchline of this book is easy to express, albeit difficult for most people to accept or even to calmly and rationally contemplate. The belief in authority, which includes all belief in government, is irrational and self-contradictory. It is contrary to civilization and morality and constitutes the most dangerous, destructive superstition that has ever existed. Rather than being a force for order and justice, the belief in authority is the arch enemy of humanity. Of course, nearly everyone is raised to believe the exact opposite, that obedience to authority is a virtue, at least in most cases, that respecting and complying with the laws of government is what makes us civilized, and that disrespect for authority leads only to chaos and violence. In fact, people have been so thoroughly trained to associate obedience with being good that attacking the concept of authority will sound, to most people, like suggesting that there is no such thing as right and wrong, and no need to abide by any standards of behavior, and no need to have any morals at all. That is not what is being advocated here. Quite the opposite. Indeed, the reason the myth of authority needs to be demolished is precisely because there is such a thing as right and wrong. It does matter how people treat each other, and people should always strive to live moral lives. Despite the constant authoritarian propaganda claiming otherwise, having respect for authority and having respect for humanity are mutually exclusive and diametrically opposed. The reason to have no respect for the myth of authority is so that we can have respect for humanity and justice.
Excellent. Thank you.
And this is, of course, true because he just said it because he was reading from that book, and you know how a book is more true than somebody's words because, of course, they took the time to write them down.
And the meaning of government I'm talking about is the group of people who claim to have the right to rule other human beings.
Now keep in mind that this is Larkin's definition of government before I called in. This was uninfluenced by our discussion or anything like that. This is his idea right here.
For this segment, I wanted to set the tone by reading just a quick paragraph from Larkin's book. This is a couple pages after what he read. The trouble is that the average person's belief system rests upon a hodgepodge of vague, often contradictory concepts and assumptions. Terms such as morality and obedience, laws and legislatures, leaders and citizens are used constantly by people who have never rationally examined such concepts. The first step in trying to understand the nature of authority or government is to define what the word means. Oh, isn't that the truth? What is this thing called government? So, Larkin, just as we went to the break in the last segment, you were saying that this refers to the right to rule. What does that mean?
Well, it's not, and the people who use the term government don't even think about this enough to know what it is they're saying. It's not just the ability to control people. Like lots of gangs or individuals have that. When people talk about government and they call their commands laws, and when they demand money, they call it taxes. The way people talk about it actually shows the nature of what it is or what they imagine it to be, which is a group that has the moral right to tell the rest of us what to do and to hurt us if we disobey, and which in turn implies that the rest of us have a moral obligation to obey, and that it's actually immoral and bad for us to disobey those in government. And that's, in contrast to if you disobey a street gang, nobody thinks you're the bad guy.
Actually, I can't believe he got away with saying this, because a lot of the times if you do have a mob in, like, say, a community, and, you decide to stand up for your rights or yourself, you are the bad guy because you're rocking the boat, you're causing these disturbances. It's not the bad guys that are doing it. It's you're doing it because you don't want to submit. And this happens all the time. In numerous situations, so I can't believe he got away with saying this, and everybody just said, yeah, that's just a point of fact that, if you rock the boat in a bad situation, nobody's going to get mad at you.
And nobody thinks they have the moral right to rule. They might have the ability, they might have enough violence behind them that they can do such things, but it's the perception that there's something legitimate about the violent domination of others that government does that makes it government. Because if people don't imagine it to be a legitimate ruling class, they don't call it government. They just call it a gang or whatever else. So there's that essential moral component to the belief in authority and government. Authority is basically the right to rule. That's the moral component, that because of what it is, whether from the rituals or whatever else, it has the right to do this to us, to control us and boss us around and take our money, and we're bad if we disobey. That's really what is implied by the term government.
So we would all have that right then to do that. I mean, if it was like government has the right to take things from people to use towards other things, then wouldn't that mean that the people would have that right?
Right. We are the government.
Whoa,
government is us.
Right, we are. Yeah, well, as soon as you start to look at the concept,
I mean, we do have that right. I mean, I would direct you to look up, the Magna Carta, or even, how this country formed itself. I mean, it was through violence against the currently accepted government. I mean, the people just rose up and said, hey, that's enough. You're full of shit. We're going to take control of the situation, and that's just the way it's going to be. And that's exactly what we did. That's what all governments are, is the people asserting their will. And yeah, it usually gets corrupted in the end, but that doesn't mean that the government itself is necessarily as corrupt as the instance that you're looking at. I mean, our government right now does all kinds of things that it's not authorized to do. And the way it does that is through contracts, through commercial law, maritime law. Look up the difference between common law and maritime law, and you will find out that when you go into a courtroom, any courtroom in the United States except for the Supreme Court that sits like 9 different ways, you are in a maritime courtroom. They are judging you based on a contract. That is what they're doing. They usurp the entire Constitution in order to do that.
Except rationally, everything just explodes. It doesn't make any sense, because the one of the most basic ways to point out that the notion of government is bogus is to say, well, can human beings give somebody else a right they don't have?
Right.
And if they can't, then how did the people in government get those rights?
Of course, he never even goes into the discussion of what if they can. What if I can give somebody else rights that I don't have through the consent of the governed? Okay? So basically what that means is, you know, two people of an equal plane cannot resolve a dispute. I mean, yeah, you can say anything you want. We can have a forum or whatever, but I can just choose to ignore your forum. So, you know, we had a contract or we had some sort of agreement, and, you know, these were the terms. And, you know, I took your money, and then I just decided, you know, who cares about you? You're not important. And so I didn't fulfill my obligation. Well, if we are on equal plane, right? There's nothing you can do. I mean, what are you going to do? Are you going to come and tell me I have to give you the money back? Because all that's going to do is create violence. Whereas in a system of government, what you can do is say, okay, this person has the power to resolve disputes, and what he says goes for the matter of the society as a whole. So what you end up doing is you have a forum, you know, and that's why there's a jury, to try to make this as fair as possible. But ultimately, somebody has to decide, you know, what is the equitable solution. There has to be a way to mitigate violence. There's no way around this if everybody is on the equal playing field. If everybody is equal, then there is no dispute resolution. Because if I am king and you are king, the only option is you get really pissed off and you shoot me. Or I just decide that since we're on equal playing field and nobody can ever, you know, come after me for what I do, maybe I just take your money and then kill you. And yeah, I'm sure this is an isolated incident, but ultimately you have to have a method of dispute resolution. And in order to do that, you have to have somebody in superior position. You can't have everybody on equal playing field and then come to a decision. I mean, I could even volunteer myself to your forum and then get the decision and just be like, well, I don't like that decision, so I'm going to ignore you again. And all that would do is frustrate you more. This argument is completely ridiculous. Larkin seems to pull this right out of his butt. He doesn't seem to, you know, direct to anything of substance. He just kind of says that, you know, the government doesn't exist. It's a fantasy.
They couldn't have. And then you could say, well, if they have the right to do it, then so do I. We're both just people. You know, they may have a huge office and drive around a limo. They're still just a human being. They have the same rights I do. If they can tax you, so can I. And actually, the correct conclusion is, if I can't tax you, neither can they. But that's something that goes against people's indoctrination and against the whole belief in government, the whole belief that there really can be such thing as a legitimate ruling class that's allowed to do things that would be bad if I did it or you did it or any normal person would do it. But if this superhuman thing called government does it, then it's okay. That's really the essence of the belief in government. Now, that there can be a thing that has an exemption from morality.
Right. Now you're throwing around a lot of beliefs like superstition, or words like belief, superstition, and myth. Around page 10, some people are going to be kind of shocked when you make the assertion that government doesn't even exist in objective reality. But don't we see and experience it like all around us all the time? Feel it? No,
we do not. Now people can say, well, people say, well, of course it's real. Look, you know, if you go to Washington, you see big buildings. Yeah, the buildings exist. Where's government? Well, you can see the politicians. They're real. Yeah, they're people. They talk funny, but they're people. Well, what about the cops? Yeah, those are people too. And they have real guns and real tanks and real planes and all that's real. Right. Government is not, because government is not the sum of buildings and people and guns and law books and all that. Government implies the right to rule.
I'm going to go ahead and call this intellectual elitism. Basically, what he's saying is that a concept does not exist in reality. Well, no concept really exists in reality. I mean, when you start looking at, like, say, quantum physics, right? You get to a level of particulate behavior that doesn't seem to follow any rules, like, time, space, matter, all that falls apart. And so if you extrapolate that out, the world which we know does not really exist in this objective reality. And this is just a ridiculous argument because we know the world's real. We live on the world. We live within, the universe. And yeah, you could make abstract arguments to defeat anything of logic, but what he's saying is just complete nonsense at this point, because if government's not real, well, of course it's not. It's a concept. But, anyways, I'm going to move on.
Cool. And that does not exist. Again, a gang can have people and buildings and guns and tanks and all that. The only reason you call it government is if you imagine that it has the right to dominate and control and extort lots and lots of other people. Without that right, it ceases to be government. So I'm not pretending that if you go to Washington, you'll just find a big empty parking lot. I know what's there, but it is not government. It is a gang of thugs and thieves and liars that people imagine to be government because they hallucinate authority where there is none. They imagine it has the right to control us and boss us around and take our money when it doesn't. And if they don't have that right, as soon as you recognize that they really don't have the right to do any of that, they stop looking like government and just start looking like a gang of thieves and thugs.
Right. If you take what people think of when they're thinking of government, or the mental images even that comes to mind when you mention government to somebody, a good way to illustrate, I think, that it's just made up of people, it doesn't do anything in and of itself, is if you took what people think of as government and you removed all humans from it, it wouldn't do anything.
Yes, and a tree in a forest with no one around that falls, does it make a sound? Well, yes, it does. It makes a sound because the definition of sound is vibration. So if a tree falls, it makes vibrations, so it makes sounds. Just because nobody's there to hear the sounds doesn't mean that the sounds didn't take place.
Right. It wouldn't be any. There's nothing there. There's actually, I did a talk about this, and somebody made an animated thing of a guy talking to an alien that's on YouTube, where the alien comes down and he's trying to understand what this thing called government is. And he goes through, well, is it the building? Well, no, it's not the building. And is it the politician? And for a while, it seems like it's the politician until you realize, well, no, by himself, he's not allowed to tax you and regulate you. And it basically goes through that and eliminates everything until there's kind of nothing left. So it's not the people, it's not the guns, it's not the books, it's not the buildings. Well, what is it? And it really is this bizarre, supernatural, mythical entity that everyone in it claims to be acting on behalf of. Congress says, well, this is the law of the land. No, it's not. It's some words that you just scribbled on that piece of paper. But they talk about it in the abstract like it's something superhuman. And the cops say, well, don't blame me for what I'm doing. This is the law, whatever that is. Well, isn't the law just scribbles of human beings in a big building? But people imagine that it's not. They really imagine that it's something fundamentally different than ink that was put on paper by a human being.
Yes, and he's not actually communicating. He's just, using his larynx to make vibrations, and it's just a unique sound. It doesn't really mean anything. It's just sounds. They're not words, and words don't, combine to make sentences, and sentences don't combine to make paragraphs, and all that doesn't become a vessel for communications of thoughts and ideas. And again, I can't stand it when people make these intellectual elitist arguments, and what they're basically saying is, listen to how clever this argument is. It's so clever that you can't defeat it because I won't let you. Because anytime you try to make a rational argument, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up complete nonsense to completely derail any logic or real discussion. And that's exactly what they're doing. The three of them here are basically saying that, wow, the government can't exist because you can't put your finger on it. And that's completely ridiculous. The government is a concept. I mean, I say it later on, and basically, you know, you have multiple people in a society, and you need some form of management. And that is what government is. It's a concept. And in our government, we have what is considered the consent of the governed. We basically enact the powers of the government to govern us. And all that was basically done voluntarily. And the moment that the government stepped outside of these permissions that were given to them, we were supposed to basically dismantle the government. Well, that's the part that never happened. People are afraid of change, and it's innate human nature to just go with the flow until things just reach a point where, you know, the food isn't on the table, you know, the roof isn't over the head. I mean, until that happens, people will put up with a huge amount of despotism, or you know, whatever you want to call it. They will put up with an amazing amount of bullshit, and that's what our government is. They prey upon people's desire to be left alone, and the effect of that is nobody wants to stand up and say this government is rogue. And it is. Everybody can look out and see it's rogue. I mean, he talks about how, you know, the politicians are elected and they're obviously, you know, criminals and fraudsters and stuff. Yeah, everybody knows that. But nobody wants to put down their limbs, their blood on rocking that boat. The same thing happens with gangs. I mean, if you are in an environment where the gangs kind of run the area and you decide enough is enough, you will receive pressure from your neighbors to shut up and just let things go, because basically violence begets more violence. So when you try to defend yourself, those people are going to retaliate not just at you, but at your neighbors, and they're going to do that on purpose because they know exactly what's going to happen, that you are going to be held responsible by, you know, your family and your friends. And just because our government failed monumentally doesn't mean that it wasn't the right thing to do. It doesn't really mean anything except for it's in human nature not to rock the boat.
And as we're going to get into in more detail as the show goes on, this, as we have defined it and described it through your book, The Most Dangerous Superstition, is essentially a religious belief.
Yep.
And we are not supposed to talk about religion in polite company because people go nuts.
You're not supposed to talk about politics in polite company either, so...
But I repeat myself.
And you're really not supposed to talk about the fact that politics is religion in polite company.
I've tried. It really doesn't go well.
Yeah, and the reason people freak out when you challenge their ideas in government is because they are faith-based ideas. They're not the result of logic and thinking. It's something they were just taught to take on faith, that we have to have a ruling class and that it has the right to do these things to us.
Towards something that really baffled me for many years, and it's the political versus private or personal critical thinking and emotional intelligence. So there are these people, I see them all the time out there in the real world, and they have these five senses. And they use them in their, let's focus on their professional lives. They use them to take in information. and then they process that information and label it in a way that's accurate and functional, and then they integrate it. They remove contradictions, and eventually it gets to a point where their understanding is such that they can explain or teach it to others, what they've assimilated through this, accurate interface with objective reality. And then the very same people who, are using what's often called critical thinking or the trivium in their private lives or their professional lives will move into their political lives, their public lives, and they will say something like, we need the government because people are just incapable of making most of the really important decisions that affect their lives. They can't do that. And then within 2 minutes, they will say that government itself is just and under control because it's chosen by those people. It's so freaking weird, right? Because that's like a huge contradiction. So there's the hodgepodge, right? There's the hodgepodge that you described. People just throwing together things they've heard, not because they're dumb. Like I said on the show last week, one of the frustrating things for me is that I often feel like I'm talking to somebody who might be naturally more intelligent than me, but they're going into this emotional defense. And this is where it gets really tricky, right?
Yeah, this is the kind of thing that being intelligent does not really spare you from. Like, you don't not fall for this because you're intelligent.
Right.
It's necessarily.
Because it's a faith-based indoctrination thing that's pounded into their heads that they don't believe as a result of thinking and logic and evidence. They're just told that it is so. And they in their daily lives they seem to make sense. They seem to be able to live their lives, but it also shows the religious nature of the belief in government, because really what it boils down to, now they won't word it this way because then it'll sound as ridiculous as it is, but really what it boils down to is saying, I don't trust people. People are untrustworthy and unpredictable, and some of them are malicious. So my solution is to take some of those people, and not even the average ones, some of those people, the ones that we all know are crooked liars, and give them permission to violently control and rob the rest of us as a solution to solve the problem of the fact that some human beings are nasty or untrustworthy. We're going to take some of them, some of the most untrustworthy around, give them permission to violently control us all, and that will protect us from the untrustworthiness of mankind.
Right, and that goes back to basically what you just said. What kind of people does a thing like this even attract? When it's people and positions instead of principles, it's always, you're right, it's always going to be the worst types of people, as history has demonstrated again and again and again, that will slither, claw their way into those slots. But another thing that you bring up in the book that I think is really important, it's more important than what might be going on in the minds of the so-called rulers, and this is the thread that's woven throughout the book, is what's going on in the minds of the ordinary people who, as you say, often make those in power into complete monsters.
See, this argument is completely bullshit too. I mean, basically he puts this negative connotation on everything, so then of course you're going to agree with him. But the idea was, if everybody votes for this person, then they must be good, they must be true, they must be honorable. But the problem, the way they usurp this natural ability for people to choose in their own interest, is they gave government in these contracts all this power, to basically, yes, steal money from one person and give it to the other person. So now, instead of voting for your interest, you start voting for the person that offers you the most stuff. and they basically short-circuited the voting provisions of the Constitution, and they did this very deliberate. The whole purpose of the Constitution was to make sure that government remained small. It wasn't supposed to do schools. It wasn't supposed to do welfare. It wasn't supposed to do any of these things that it does. And the reason why it wasn't supposed to is because then if the government has no power, the people that are elected based on their merits, which doesn't happen nowadays. I mean, to put it in perspective, I think Barack Obama spent the better part of $1 trillion to get an office that pays $200,000. I mean, because all those people gave him all that money because he has such an enormous influence over the economy. So yeah, the better part of $1 trillion versus $200,000 doesn't make any sense. But a $12 trillion economy with somebody with the puppet strings pretty much, now you're looking at maybe not so bad of an investment, and that's exactly what it is. I mean, anytime people could try to tear down the Constitution, what they do is they look outside and they look at the world that they know of, and then they say, well, this government must be constitutional, so the Constitution must be defective. And it is. The defect of the Constitution is the human element in the Constitution. I mean, when they instituted our government, they basically said, what form of government did you get? Did we get a democracy or republic? And they replied back, a republic, if you can keep it. And that was the whole point. You have to maintain the government. And I'm sure what they're going to respond with is, well, this is exactly what I was saying before. Is they said if you don't like it, you should try to run for office and change it from within. Well, that's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying that the government that we have doesn't even resemble the government that we created. It's so corrupt, it's so defunct, that the only course of action is to start anew. And that is exactly what the Declaration of Independence said, that when the government doesn't align with its purpose, the only course of action is to get rid of it.
Now, in an interview that you did with Jan Irvin of Gnostic Media podcast, I heard you say, I thought this was interesting, I don't know, and very introspective, I don't know what the me of today could have said to the me of 20 years ago that would have made a difference. So this is emotional, not just because it is a faith-based belief, but we also have how these beliefs are put into us. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Right. This is a belief system we're indoctrinated into, and I was too. I was taught to be a good state worshiper and to think that the big gang has the right to take everybody's money and boss them around, and anybody who disobeys is bad and deserves to be caged or tased or whatever.
I just love how this guy uses negative words to almost force you to come to the conclusion that he wants you to. The big gang, the government, the big gang, can force you to do whatever it wants, and if you don't like it, they'll put you in a box and they'll hurt you and all that stuff. And I mean, to some degree, it is correct. It does happen, but that's taking a very narrow-minded view. I mean, there are a lot of people that have been, accused of crimes that they didn't commit, and they use the legal system, to be resolved of the charges, and it isn't perfect. I don't think anything is, but to put this negative connotation on everything instead of just, laying it out like it is, he's trying to invoke an emotional response, and it's pretty deceptive. And You know, I don't necessarily disagree with his argument. I can't stand his presentation on this argument.
I was raised in that religion too. And anytime, especially a belief that's that fundamental to the way you see society, literally being raised in that, I saw evil as good and good as evil. It was totally, completely backwards. I saw the biggest gang of murderer and thieves on the planet as the good guys who protected society. Because I was taught to believe in authority and government, and taught that, well, because they did these rituals and there's these documents and stuff, somehow what comes out the other end is they're allowed to rule us. And that makes their actions good, despite the fact that their actions are stealing and bossing people around and caging people. Well, we did all these political rituals, so that makes it good. And it makes any who resist them or disobey bad. So I really was trained to see evil as good and good as evil, like everybody who's raised to be a statist. And to have someone come along.
The age-old adage of good versus evil. I mean, this might as well be a story like, Santa Claus, if, he knows if you've been naughty or nice, if you want your present, you better be good, because, this is completely absurd. I mean, morality doesn't dictate good or bad. I mean, even right and wrong is perception based. It's perspective. It's, and if you look at a war, you can be a third party, and you can positively say that all wars are morally repugnant, and there's all kinds of things that you can say about morality, but ultimately morality is given to us by an external force. I will refer you to your feelings. When you steal something, or when you lie, you experience an emotion, and that is what dictates morality. If you never learn to listen to your emotions, then of course you are duped. And if you still haven't, you're still duped. Logic, you can prove anything logically. All you have to do is control the argument, and they know this, because that's exactly what they do on this program, is they control the argument pretty well. And all radio shows control the argument just the same.
Along and say, even if they don't say it in these words, to basically say everything you believe is totally upside down, you're cheering for evil and condemning good. People don't want to hear that. They want to think that they're the good guys because they're trying to be the good guys. And that's the good news, is the people out there, they're not genuinely malicious. They're not people who in their daily lives go around robbing and attacking people. Most people know, don't do that. That's bad. But they're taught that there's this giant exemption called politics and government and authority that completely turns morality inside out. And suddenly they're allowed to steal, and you're not allowed to avoid that theft, or you're the bad guy. And so they have this belief, and for someone to come along and say, yeah, you're actually advocating mass evil, theft and thuggery and kidnapping and murder, they don't want to consider the possibility, because, what does that say about them? Oops, sorry, I accidentally advocated mass evil for most of my life. People don't really want to think about that. And so I use myself as the example and think back to when I was a statist and say, if I had a time machine and went back and was talking to that me, I'm not sure what I would say. I'd try all the things I try on people today, but I'm not sure what would have made me dare to look at my own belief system and my own assumptions and my own superstitions and actually look at them objectively and rationally. And to this day, I don't know why I didn't, and then I don't know why I did ever look at them. I still can't say. It seems to just be something that just happens in somebody's head. They'll suddenly decide to dare to look at their fundamental assumptions, and a lot of other people just won't. And I don't know why. I don't know why I did it, and before that, I don't know why I didn't do it.
Yeah. It's very clear, though, why we start doing the other thing.
Right.
I've kind of made a little podcast about it here that's been going on for 160 episodes. Because this is an institution where you're not learning by like one or two memorable decrees you will submit. This is a very slow and steady experience within that institution. And as you said, your quote that I liked was, it trains the humanity out of people because they believe that in this realm and this realm only, which is the most important one, they don't get confused about who the protagonist and antagonist is in a movie or a cartoon. But here they have it completely backwards, right? Right is wrong, and doing the wrong thing is what is, dignified and just. It's very frustrating to watch once you're outside of that.
Right, and the most dangerous superstition gets into how people are very specifically, intentionally trained to view obedience as the measure of whether you're a good person. Heck with morality. If you do what authority says, you're good. If you don't, you're bad. I mean, that's the message that is always in school every second of every minute that you're in school.
Right. And we are going to go... Larkin, you want to take some calls?
Sure.
All right. We're going to go to Jason in Wisconsin. You are on School Sucks Live. How are you doing tonight?
Yeah, this is Jason calling back.
All right. What's on your mind?
Well, I listened to the show so far, and you guys touched on a wide variety of topics, including evolution. But it seems to me that you're basically saying that government is bad. I mean, that seems like the gist of it.
Basically. Mm-hmm.
And then you define government in kind of a weird way, I would say. I would say that the definition of a government is whenever you have a society and you try to manage the interactions between the people of the society, that's when you arrive at a government. I mean, you can define it in many different ways, but usually when you start defining it any other way, you end up talking about specific forms of government.
Well, I have no problem, and this is something that I started the show with tonight when this conversation began. Oh, my goodness, hold on. Let me bring Larkin back into the conversation. Larkin, were you able to hear all that?
No, you had me on hold the whole time.
That's too bad. Oh, man.
My answers would be a little better if I know what the question is.
All right, so, Jason, what you're driving at is that you've identified that we're saying government is bad, evil, etc., and that you feel we're not being specific enough about what government is?
No, I think that when you talk about government being bad, I mean, you can look at a form of a government, and then you can look at its actions or effects, and then you can arrive at a conclusion that is definitely bad. But when you talk about the concept of a government, like basically I would define a government as the management of interactions between the people in some sort of region.
Ooh, so let's say we started calling that government.
So if you need more time to read all this, just go ahead and hit the pause button and read it at your leisure. But what I'm trying to show you is that government and governance are two words that refer to basically the same concept. And I mean, you can see that right here. What is governance? It's a noun. It's government. It's a method or system of government or management. I mean, if you want to start negating words, I mean, we're going to get nowhere.
Instead of government. And let's just say, and Larkin, you can jump in on this as well, let's just say we start throwing around the idea, we just begin the discussion that one day, with a little bit of work and education and thought and honesty, we could evolve to a point where what is at the center of society does not have to be men with if we want to go over a few thousand years, who had the biggest stones or swords or guns or bombs, or whatever justifications they came up with to rule over other people. But someday at the center of society, we could have an authority that is not person or position based, but based on principles.
Well, I think that that's what we had at the inception of our own government. I mean, since then,
we didn't
it's
nearly
radically changed.
I have a question. Can you name any government anywhere in the world at any time in history that didn't claim the right to demand money from innocent people under threat of hurting anyone who didn't pay up?
The Indian tribes.
That isn't government.
So his argument here is basically, I'm wrong because I don't know what the word government means. Let's review what he said government was.
And the meaning of government I'm talking about is the group of people who claim to have the right to rule other human beings.
So obviously what he's saying is the chief never claimed the right to dictate what the tribe did, and that's nonsense. I mean, the chief decided when the tribe went to war with other tribes. I mean, in fact, when we made treaties with the Indian tribes, we basically recognized them as a form of government. I mean, you can't make treaties with people. It is a government if he wants to acknowledge that or not.
They didn't call it government.
Actually,
it was organization.
Yeah, but
yes, of course they didn't call it government. They didn't even speak English. And the word government is kind of specific, in the English form. But in concept, they were essentially a government. They had small roaming governments. Now they didn't have a concept of land ownership, and they didn't have a concept of money, but they did have trade. They did have dispute resolution. They did have most of the requirements for being a government. It's just an absurd argument, but what happens next is just amazing, because keep in mind what this whole show was about.
Well, yeah, it wasn't a government in the sense that most people like to hold on to nowadays. But if you go back to the definition that I was trying to go with, where whenever you try to manage the interactions of a people in a region, you end up with a government or governance, which is just a different tense of the word. But
it's so much more than that.
Tribe,
it's a fundamentally different thing. There's an interesting exchange that somebody, I forget the other party's name, but it was an exchange between somebody and Thomas Jefferson, who pointed to the Indian tribes and said, they have organization, they have their elders, and most people listen to their elders because they know stuff, but they don't actually have government. And he asked Jefferson, do you think their life would be improved by having a government? And Jefferson said, no, leave them the way they are. Our version of government would not help them. And they didn't call that government. They said they didn't have a government. They have organization. They have people who know stuff. But government, what everybody uses that term for is the people with the right to rule, the people who tax us and boss us around.
Hold up here. Let's review what they said, this appeal to authority or this logical fallacy was all about. The whole purpose of this entire episode from School Sucks. I'm going to replay it for you. Hold on.
Science of logic. It's a little overwhelming at first. Here's the definition. Your logical fallacy is an appeal to authority. If you used the opinion or position of an authority figure or institution of authority in place of an actual argument. It is important to note with this fallacy that authorities in given fields may very well have valid arguments, and that one should not dismiss another's experience and expertise. To form an argument, however, one must defend it on its merits, i.e. know why the person in authority holds that particular position that they do. It is, of course, entirely possible. It is, of course, entirely possible that the opinion of a person or institution in authority is wrong. Therefore, authority, the authority that such person or institution holds does not have any intrinsic bearing upon whether the claims are true or not.
Okay, now listen to what Larkin says about these positions of authority and their positions.
Right, exactly, because as soon as people accept that it's a valid argument to say, well, somebody really important said this, you can find the most idiotic things imaginable coming out of the mouths of people who are really important. and then people will pile on top of that. They'll fall back on that excuse no matter what actual logic dictates. And
okay, so let's review exactly what Larkin just said, just so we can be clear what just happened.
It's a fundamentally different thing. There's an interesting exchange that somebody, I forget the other party's name, but it was an exchange between somebody and Thomas Jefferson, who pointed to the Indian tribes and said, they have organization, they have their elders, and most people listen to their elders because they know stuff, but they don't actually have government. And he asked Jefferson, do you think their life would be improved by having a government? And Jefferson said, no, leave them the way they are. Our version of government would not help them.
So yes, Mr. Larkin, thank you for giving me an excellent example of what appeal to authority is, or what this whole episode was about. You are guilty of this logical fallacy that you proclaim is so irritating to yourself, and now I get to call you a hypocrite. But also listen to what he says. He says, this other person that you don't remember the name asked Jefferson, and Jefferson replied, and I'm assuming that this isn't a quote, that this is an estimate of what he said, but he said, our form of government. And if you listen to what he says, Jefferson never... Well, he doesn't say that Jefferson ever said that they don't have a government. The way it sounded to me is that Jefferson was saying that, our form of government isn't superior to their form of government, and that's correct. I mean, no form of government is more perfect than another. It's just one might work for a population better than another because of culture and numerous other things, but... I just can't believe that they went on this long about these logical fallacies, and then they go and they put this logical fallacy in there, and none of them say anything.
Well, the chief indeed had the right to make decisions that affected the entire tribe. So
he had no enforcement power.
See, now this rebuttal is just ridiculous. Now, he might not have had the same types of enforcement that we have today in our form of government, but he definitely probably could have used expulsion, so he could have exiled you from the tribe for not following his directives. He could have shunned you and imposed other, forms of enforcement. I mean, enforcement doesn't have to be a jail cell. There's a lot of different ways to use coercion. And Larkin basically just kind of hangs himself on this whole thing.
He did, and he did in the same mannerisms that you think that this theoretical government that was changes in schooling and stuff that we could arrive to. He didn't coerce people to do the things that he wanted them to do.
Right.
But in fact, he used his position of honor, or however you want to describe it, to basically, when he made recommendations, they wanted to carry out his will without any coercion.
Right. So he was a leader, not a ruler.
And this is just another wordplay. I mean, he goes, well, he was a leader, not a ruler. What exactly is the difference? I mean, just the type of coercion, the severity of coercion, just the way you choose to look at it. I mean, this guy usually probably argues with people that are not very well versed on anything, and he probably gets away with these just nonsensical arguments because most people are not very good thinking on their feet. And I tried my best, but I actually didn't notice the fact that he had this logical fallacy, which the show was entirely about, until after I reviewed the materials. And I also think that there's, parts missing or something, because I remember certain things that are not here. The only thing I can assume is they were either edited out or they happened in the after show. But anyways, let's continue.
So in a lot of ways, the Indian tribe kind of represents, your ideal form of government.
Well, I think the Indian tribes, because obviously I think it's safe to say that none of us are experts on that subject. So there might have been a variety of degrees of force used from one group of natives to the next in different places at different times. But what we're really focused on here is force. Now, one interesting thing about Native Americans is because it was a civilization that had never been, for lack of a better word, westernized, we can see a look further back in time at how the concept of leadership might have turned into government. Now, this is somewhat theoretical, but I think there's an author named Robert Higgs, with 2 G's, if you want to look him up, who's done some very good research and work on this subject. In the beginning, when people traveled in packs, wandering and gathering, hunting, etc., there would be times when people would have to gravitate to the leadership of the strongest, the most trustworthy. But the thing was, that was always somebody that the people in the tribe put into that position of leadership because they knew that person. That person had proven themselves. They trusted that person. What that morphed into, with respect to even the softest forms of government we have today, those people are complete strangers who have done nothing to earn our trust. In fact, they get into the positions where we can even choose them by constantly violating our trust. So I understand what you're saying, and I want to ask you.
Again, this is just nonsense. One of the things that's definitely changed in the last 300, 400 years is the size of population. I mean, it's no longer realistic to think that everybody's going to know the president that they vote for. And that's why we were supposed to have this responsible media to educate the people, and it has all fallen apart. I grant that, but these arguments that they're making they're very weak, and I can't believe nobody calls them out on it. I mean, the caller that's gonna follow me up is basically gonna give them a gigantic go team, and they do deserve a lot of respect. I mean, I look at the quality of this show and the effort that they've obviously put into it, and that is definitely respectable. But just because somebody's putting effort into something doesn't mean that you should agree with what they're saying. In fact, I mean, if your purpose is to disseminate information and in the pursuit of truth, debate is the most efficient way of doing that. And I also want to point out another thing. I hate it when people bring up books. They like to bring up books because we're kind of taught in the educational system that words are inaccurate, but written text is more accurate. And there's really no proof to that. I mean, you do get a sense of historical perspective, maybe, but you can write something down and lie just as well as you can look somebody in the eye and lie. There's absolutely nothing requiring you to write down truth. And I mean, you could say that, if you write a book that has lies in it, you could get, called out on it, but that is not necessarily the case either, because somebody has to, go through the effort of actually doing all that, and then they have to market your rebuttal. Like, if I didn't rebut this whole conversation here on YouTube, this presentation gives a sense that they know what they're talking about, and about certain things they very well might, but in this particular case, I think this Larkin Rose guy is completely full of shit, and I think Brett really should stay within the confines of the educational system, because whenever he tries to venture outside school, I really see a lot of inconsistencies and just I don't want to say he's lying, but there's nothing to keep him honest. I will say that.
What do you think? All the ground we've just covered, what do you think the ideal form of government would be?
Well, when I read the Constitution, I idealize it quite a bit. I mean, there's very few force mechanisms in it. In fact, the only one that really comes to mind is, well, the only two that come to mind are the taxation provisions and the war provisions. And the rest of them are actually just like an illusion that was created back starting around 1880 with the advent of corporations. That's when statutes started coming into play, is because now that we had these new entities called corporations, of course the state needed the power to regulate them. So you ended up with these statutes, and then we ended up after that basically corporatizing every individual so that these statutes now apply to them, which is a lot of the reasons why when free men go into the courts, they try to say I'm not this corporation, which doesn't work, because even the people that understand it proclaim that since you use this community, you owe it to the community to kind of abide by their rules. I mean, if you actually look back at even speed limits and that kind of thing, you end up with that was originally instituted to control commerce of those large trucks, the 18-wheelers.
Ari in the studio with me. On the phone, we have Larkin Rose, and we also have a caller named Jason. We spent the last segment talking about this language of government, and Jason had called me before the show and said that he believed he had identified a contradiction in our position. We're going to get to that, but when we went to the break, I had asked him what he felt like the ideal form of government was. We had identified the Constitution as that, and then during the break, we actually had a little bit of chatter there about did the Constitution work. So, Jason, I'll start by opening it up to you. A lot of people have a lot of reverence for the Constitution. We are, 240 years later, looking back and evaluating how it went. I would say, did it work? And you would probably say no, but it seemed like you were putting some of the blame on the development of the corporation in America as a person.
Well, that was the mechanism that they used to basically usurp the Constitution and its original meaning. I would further say that most of the people that I talk to that have any reverence to the Constitution haven't even read it. And those that have read it, they look at the inconsistencies of their current government and what the Constitution says, and they just kind of somehow ignore those or somehow justify them. Like, you have the freedom of speech, but obviously you can't go into a building and yell fire because that would cause all kinds of negative consequences. Well, in a way I kind of see the argument, but in another way I kind of see it as, well, all you have to do is start that incremental process, and now you can no longer speak anywhere, which is exactly what we see on YouTube, where if you try to peacefully assemble, good luck with that, baton to your head, that kind of thing. But as far as the contradiction, I kind of want to isolate that and go into specifics.
Sure.
You're basically saying that, we can live without a government. Governments are bad. We can do better.
I'm saying we could one day. Yes.
I'm saying we already
Okay.
do. I'm saying there already isn't such thing as government.
Right.
We're hallucinating legitimacy where there is none.
And I'm saying that one day people would be able to live without that hallucination as a part of their lives at all. So I tend to agree with Larkin. Makes a very convincing case in the book that yes, objectively, this is not something that actually exists. Right. But the illusion is very, very important to people. And when you try to use facts and moral arguments to shatter it, oh, it doesn't go well. So I'm saying one day I believe that people will move beyond this myth the same way, by and large, human civilization has moved beyond other myths, the same way, by and large, people, as they get older and more mature, let go of myths that they are taught about when they are younger.
Like Santa Claus.
Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny. For me, it went Tooth Fairy, Easter Bunny, Santa Claus, God, government.
Well, to just briefly say something about my background, I was kind of ahead of the mark. I had my realization at the age 12, but no one around me could, basically see what I saw, and I basically had to deal with everything on my own. And, that was kind of an isolating, force upon me. But the contradiction that I see basically with your argument is, how can you have a collaboration of even a moderately sized group without some sort of organization?
Oh, I'm not at all anti-organization. I'm saying no human being has an exemption from morality. And if you use the example of the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8 is a list of exemptions from morality. They're allowed to steal. Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes. Even if it's in a limited way, what that was obviously doing is saying these people over here have the right to do something that none of the rest of you have the right to do. They have the right to steal.
Well, let me dispel another common myth.
Well, let's deal with that. Let's deal with that part first. Let's deal with that, and let's remember too that this was not even the fantasy of the public granting them this privilege did not exist. They did this in secret. They would not let reporters in to cover what they were doing. This was very much a cabal that produced this document. So go ahead.
I understand that, but as far as the actions of the Constitution, it was never designed or implemented with the intention of actually being able to touch the individuals. And in fact, if you look at the Constitution, it directs most of its power towards the actual federal government, and then anywhere that it has any interactions is always supposed to be with the state. It is never, the U.S. Constitution is never to have any direct action towards any individual anywhere.
Well, I've heard that before, and we can guess about intentions, but look what the words actually say. Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes. And then it goes on with the restrictions.
This is a little ridiculous, too. You also have to look at what the court said, and what they talk about is direct and indirect taxes, and that has evolved so much over the years. I mean, we had a whole bunch of civil rights constitutional amendments put in that changed the entire appearance of government. It changed the entire outline of the government. And that's, I mean, we didn't have an income tax until 1913. We also didn't have a Federal Reserve until 1913. I mean, you can't look at things the way that they are and have no respect for history, which, I'm a little disappointed because Brett is a historian, and I don't really subscribe to history, but I do read a lot of case law, and probably not enough to be considered an expert. But if you do read what some of the earlier courts said, it's completely different than what some of the newer decisions are. Like, for example, I can't remember the year, but I'm just going to throw it out there. There was a lawsuit between a library and a copyright holder. And the Supreme Court ruled that the library was not responsible for the illegal use of a copy machine, because they didn't facilitate it. They had the copy machine there for legitimate purposes, and which is kind of ridiculous. I mean, you have a library full of copyrighted books. I mean, what legitimate purpose is there to the copy? But that's what they ruled. And then 5 years ago, with Napster and some of the internet companies, they completely changed their tune, and they made basically the library responsible for governing the use of the copy machines. I mean, I kept with the same analogy, but what they said was Napster was responsible for the illegal communications that the users did, and file share, and all these companies are responsible. And I mean, I don't even know how many people use Google, but they have over 1 million servers. They probably have 1 billion users a day. It's impossible for these companies to actually do what the courts have changed their minds about. And another thing I want you to keep in mind is how statutes have changed the government. In fact, I'm just going to point you to Prohibition real quick. Prohibition was started with a constitutional amendment, and it basically prohibited alcohol. And it was ended with a constitutional amendment. But if you contrast that same prohibition to, say, the prohibition of drugs, the Controlled Substances Act of, I think, 1968, that was done with statutes. So what changed between, prohibition of alcohol and prohibition of drugs? And if you look, it has to do with the Commerce Clause and how they are saying that everything is commerce, everything is contracts, so they really have no limitations, and you have no rights. Through the constitutions, you have privileges. And I know this argument's lost on a lot of people, but I'm a little disappointed that it just kind of got absurd, and I guess time was an issue. I don't really know. I mean, if the point here is to disseminate quality information, we all failed at that.
Now, just look at the first part of the phrasing, Congress shall have the power to. Obviously, if what came in the rest of the sentence is something we all have the power to do, they wouldn't have written it down. Like, they wouldn't write down Congress shall have the power to tie their own shoes. You don't need to write that down. You don't have to call that a power. The only thing you need to write down is permission to do something that's bad if anyone else does it.
Actually, with the concept of enumerated powers, you would have to write it down. You would have to give Congress the power to tie their shoes. If I mean, that's what enumerated powers means. It means you can do these things and no more. Again, Larkin goes off on these tangents that really have no basis in reality. They just they obscure truth to the point where you're forced to agree with them because of course they're not going to write down that they have power to tie their shoes, but that has nothing to do with anything. Congress is a legislative body. It's not a person. Congress doesn't have shoes. People that are part of Congress have feet, and they put shoes on their feet. What does that have to do with anything? Again, it's just these illogical, nonsensical arguments, and it's that intellectual superiority, or I'm just so fucking clever, and you're not. I can tear down your arguments all day long, Mr. Larkin. Anyways.
No, that's not. That's a mischaracterization. I mean, basically, what the Constitution said is the government shall be able to do nothing except these things.
Yeah, robbery, crushing insurrection, and declaring war.
I understand you like to put negative connotations on everything, but basically to put it in Brett's terms, to put it in Brett's terms, basically the function of the Constitution is to give the magic soap to the people so that when the government gets out of line, they are then justified in removing it. That is the real power of the Constitution. It's not...
Did you notice it utterly failed?
No, but that's and that's not the argument. The magic soap, or the magic costume, as it's called, is what the people in government have, right?
Yeah, it doesn't say the people shall have the power to lay and collect taxes. It says Congress.
The people don't get the magic soap or the magic costume. That's for the rulers.
Go ahead, you say it's a negative connotation, I want to hear your positive connotation on telling somebody that they're allowed to demand money from somebody else and hurt them if they don't pay up. What's the positive way to describe that?
Well, to put it in context, I mean, what I was trying to say is that the federal government only has power to tax the states.
Who says?
And then, well, that's exactly what it was intended to do.
How do you know that?
By research.
Research what? That's not what the words say. It's not what the Federalist Papers say.
So Larkin is our guest. We're talking about his book, The Most Dangerous Superstition, and we have been using that book, this story, this thesis, to deal with the argumentum ad verecundium. If you're just joining us, I will refresh the definition of that. This is the argument from authority, or the appeal to authority. And a very short and sweet definition is that this is when it is argued that something is true because someone of authority, like an expert, but that's the nice way. It's also,
or indeed an author, which is exactly what Larkin Rose is, and that's exactly what this whole thing is they're treating him like he's some sort of authority, and I haven't heard anything but conjecture from this point, from the beginning to the end, and that's just it. I have gotten a lot from the School Sucks project, and one of the things I got from it was John Taylor Gatto, and when he spoke, it did seem like he was an authority. This guy is not even remotely in the same class as Mr. Gatto. But they're kind of presenting him as some sort of authority figure or an expert or something, because he wrote this book, and that must mean something.
So a person or an institution or some hemp paper says it is true.
Well, I mean, people's criteria for what constitutes an authority or an expert in whatever field is really, really thin.
Sure.
These days. Like, I mean, look at how many people don't vaccinate their children because Jenny McCarthy said it's bad for you.
Yeah, okay.
People will do something if a celebrity tells them to do it. It doesn't even have to be an expert.
Yeah, that's really true. And some of these celebrities who are saying things, my goodness.
Yeah.
So we were talking about this restraining box of authority and how much this hurts not only public discourse, but the public and the society and the civilization. And, we got into this conversation over the last couple segments about the Constitution, but Larkin, you recognize from your conversations over the last 15 years or so that people do like a plan. And they don't ask you this directly. They don't use these words, but they have some form of, if you don't like the current system, please talk to me like a politician and tell me your 7-step, 11-step, 14-point plan for what you would do, exactly how you would want society to work. Are you familiar with this inquiry?
Absolutely. I get it all the time. It's one of the things I most commonly have to deal with. And it shows the authoritarian paradigm they're stuck in. Because if all they've ever heard and all they've ever thought about is how is government going to make this work, and how is authority, what kind of centralized, forcibly imposed authoritarian plan is going to make this happen, or take care of the poor, or protect us, or whatever else. If you say there shouldn't be one, they say, oh, well, what centralized plan do you intend to impose upon humanity instead? And it takes a while.
See, this just shows how ignorant Larkin really is about the Constitution. I mean, the Constitution set up no provisions for the poor. It set up no provisions for retirement. That is all the socialistic state that has been created over the Constitution, beyond the Constitution, through these contracts. That's what I've been trying to say. That is not constitutional government. It has nothing to do with the Constitution. And I don't think that there should be any provisions in the government for the poor or the elderly or anyone else. The only thing government is supposed to do is keep peace. That is it. And part of keeping peace is foreign invasion, so you have to have war provisions, and the only way the government can do any of that is they have to have resources, so they have to have taxation. There's plenty of forms of taxation. I mean, they could have easily just not had any provisions of taxation, and they could have just used inflation to pay for the government, but it still would have been the same taxation. They still would have stole from you all the same, because your dollar, your monetary unit, would purchase less, and that is a form of taxation. But again, this dude loves these crazy arguments that have no basis in objective reality.
For people to even grasp the concept that I'm not offering a different kind of centralized, forcibly imposed plan for society. I'm saying there isn't such thing as a legitimate one of them at all. But it's a hard thing for people to even think about that. And they're always saying things like, well, under your system, and I say, it's not a system, and it's not my anything. I'm not running for Emperor of Anarchy. I'm just going to be a person, and you're just going to be a person. You can run for Emperor of Anarchy. I'll vote for you.
The best part is, nobody has to vote for me.
Right. You don't need their vote.
Like, in that context, run might as well be declare myself.
Nice.
Right. Proclaim yourself emperor.
Because there's no rules, so they can't say I'm not legit.
Right. You're legit because you say you are. Appeal to authority.
That's
am
how
the authority.
It's done.
Now I can appeal to my own authority to prove I am. Actually, that's what the Constitution is. Congress shall have these powers because we said so. Well,
who were
said
you?
Get to say so. We said we get to say so.
And they probably didn't come up with it either. Like, 4,000 years ago in Egypt, there was probably somebody who said, listen, everybody, I'm kind of this magician guy. Like I can kind of harness the power of these gods, and what you should do is spend your entire life. Actually, it's not a should; it's a must. You're going to build my cemetery. That's going to be the purpose of your life, because I'm kind of magic-y. So, I mean, yeah. It was these decrees. That is how it started. But what's interesting, Larkin? When people ask this question, what is your plan? How does it work in your system? The whole talk to me like I'm a politician, that appeal to authority question that has these variety of forms. The question is always like, what would you do about the poor? How would people be educated? How would people be defended? The question is never like, how do a bunch of useless bureaucrats get their hands on other people's money? Because people, by and large, are good, right? So they frame these discussions. All political debate and discourse seems to be about trying to get at an understanding of what is right and what is wrong, what is moral and what is immoral. And, if morality doesn't work, then maybe we go to practicality or efficiency. But I think people, by and large, are good, and it is their goodness here that's being used against them.
Yeah, and that is the biggest danger of the belief in authority, that it isn't that bad people use it to do bad things, because who cares? Bad people are going to do bad things anyway. It's that it tricks good people into condoning or doing really nasty, horrible, violent things because they think it's for a good cause. Because they think, well, this is okay if government and authority does it.
I don't know anybody who looks at an example of police brutality or corruption or excessive force, says, "Oh, well, that's perfectly fine," you know, because they're wearing a uniform. What tends to happen is they trust these procedures, you know, to rectify the problem, and you know, the police are the worst people to govern the police. But that is why, you know, the people have the responsibility to govern the police, and we do have that power, we do have that authority. There are mechanisms in place. All we have to do is grab the control back and then invoke them. And
the people who vote for a giant welfare state because, well, we want to help the poor. Okay, by means of what? By you giving your money and asking me to give mine, or by threatening to cage me if I don't hand over my money. And this is true of every nasty regime you can think of. No nasty regime came along and said, we're going to beat people up and rule people because, well, frankly, we like power. They never say that. Hitler didn't say that. Stalin didn't say that. Mao didn't say that. They always said, this is for the people and the nation and the fatherland and the yada, 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 and we're going to have justice and yada, yada, yada. Because the tyrants know you don't go to the people and say, we want power because we want to do evil stuff.
Right.
You go to the people and say, if you give us power, we will do great things with it.
Yeah.
And if people don't understand that authority is a lie and you can't do great things with it, because all it is initiating violence against innocent people. You can't do great things by committing violence against innocent people. And when people understand that, they'll stop falling for the politician lines that, oh, if you put me in power, I'll take care of the poor and I'll protect you and I'll crack down on crime and I'll do away with this and fix that and everything else. If people realized, wait, the way he's going to pretend to do all those things is by threatening everybody else with violence if they don't follow whatever choices he says they should follow. You can't, but yeah, the belief in authority totally exploits people's virtue and good intentions and turns it into fuel for the most evil, destructive ideas imaginable.
And they do that by getting you very young and redefining what good is. From a very young age, we're taught that, being good is obedience.
But good.
I love it when people talk about, helping the poor. You can't really help people. And in fact, Mr. Gatto talked about this. In your attempt to help people, you damage them. And, the best way to lift people out of poverty is the capitalist system and the invisible hand and what Friedman talked about and basic Austrian economics. Saving and production and investments and these things that we no longer have faith in. We no longer have faith in ourselves to solve our own problems. So we empower this government that was never constructed to do these things, and we give them these these directives to solve the problem of poor. And what they do is they create welfare. And welfare creates more poor, and then it creates dependence, and then it creates economic traps where you can't get out of the system, and that's exactly what we have. And Mr. Rose is basically bringing that up because it's a common misperception about the role of our government, and our government was not set up to, regulate what individuals do as far as drug use and alcohol use. It wasn't to perfect society or invest in things. All it was supposed to do is create a system where people are free to do what they want to do in their own best interest without harming people, and to have a way of mitigating harm and dispute.
No problem.
So, before we went to the break, we were talking about people do respond to moral arguments, moral justification, and they recognize a moral authority. In fact, in the book, you have a section called Noble Motives, Evil Actions. And in this section, you talk a little bit about the Nazis and how they used false flag, basically terror attacks, to justify their first expansion to the east towards Poland. But, the noble motives for the evil actions was nothing new even then, right? I mean, Hitler was talking about the Lebensraum, which was living space in German. If you don't
right, if you don't speak German,
or if you don't understand poorly pronounced German,
right.
Lebensraum is their word. They said they were being closed in on, and they had gone through centuries in that part of the region with different, or that region of Europe with different imperial struggles. And he said, "Hey, man, we need to spread out. It's going to be fine. We deserve it." So there was always something like that attached to everything they did. I mean, they
also went to the point of making other countries not only saying we deserve it, but saying other countries were less deserving. I think what Hitler once said about Poland was that Poland has no borders, only neighbors. So it wasn't even just about saying, like, we're Germany, we deserve it. It's just saying we're Germany. Not only that, but all these other countries around us are inferior.
Oh, yeah, they don't really count.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's, you have to do that. If you're in the position of the tyrant, you have to do that to your own mercenaries to tell them you're doing something for good. Because if you tell them, well, I just want more land, at least some of them are going to say, well, that doesn't sound all that good. I don't really want to be a part of that.
Yeah.
Let's take a phone call real quick. Sure. This is Andrew in California. So, Larkin, hold on just 1 second. Okay, Andrew, you are on with Larkin Rose. This is the School Sex Radio Show. How you doing tonight?
Oh, I'm doing very well. Really enjoying the show. Larkin, big fan. Your work is definitely admirable. Thank you for everything you've done.
Thank you.
And well, I was just listening to the previous caller, and I find myself listening to him defending a document that pertains truly nothing to him, and that seems to be even his case. And I ask questions. Really, my position is never to take one. It's only to ask questions, and I ultimately find status crumbling at the knees at the end because it just doesn't stand up. That's the bottom line. And one of my favorite questions is Constitution. You signed it, right?
Yeah.
That must have been a while ago. I forget signing it.
Or that's so.
I love these derailments when you're arguing. The Constitution, dude. You signed it, right? What does that have to do with anything? You act like the signatures at the bottom of the Constitution was part of some sort of contract or some sort of authority. All it was saying is that was a true representation. That was what they decided on. That was authenticity. That's all the signatures are there for. Has nothing to do with who signed it, except for later on, if anybody disputed the words in the Constitution, the people who signed it could look at their signature and say, yes, that document is the one that I signed, and yes, it has not been tampered with. The signatures have nothing to do with who signed them except for to prove that they were not manipulated. and this basic misunderstanding of what the Constitution is and what it does and why it's there and all that. Basically, the Constitution creates a civilization of kings. Each one of us are both kings and queens, respectively. We have no masters. We have no rulers. We are our own ruler. And that's what the Constitution set up to create. It took the king and took him from his throne and said that now everyone is a king. We will own land. And originally land came through a patent office, not some sort of deed. And this. And there are people that don't pay property taxes because they do have a land patent, and that land patent has been passed on from generation to generation. And any time a municipality says you owe us taxes, and they try to circumvent that land patent, the court says no. The land patent is the superior title. It cannot be infringed upon. There is nothing more superior than a land patent. Well, nowadays we don't have land patents, so we don't have that authority over the land in which we reside. So, basically, what the courts have ruled is, if the land patent reserves the right for the property tax, then yes, you are indeed you do indeed owe property tax. But if it doesn't, then no, you do not. And some land patents have requirements for mineral rights and stuff like that. It all depended on basically the contract, the patent. And I love it when these people make these illogical, ridiculous arguments that seem to be based in logic, but they're not. Like, this guy starts off and he says, well, I don't like to make any positions. I just like to make questions. And what that type of individual does is he just basically tries to derail any conversation. And that's exactly what he did with this question. Oh, the Constitution, you signed it, right? Oh, the signature has nothing to do with its authority. It has to do with its authenticity. It's true and accurate to what was ratified. And I mean, this basic misunderstanding of what went down so many years ago leads to all these problems. That's exactly why our government is as corrupt as it is now. It's because people do not understand, and when they do not understand, they can be taken advantage of. And that's exactly what the politicians do and the lawyers do. They create all these legal apparatuses, and they confuse the issue. I can't even tell you how many rules and regulations there are. I mean, just based on the federal government, you of course have the Constitution, so that's like one big page, or 30 small pages, and then you have the federal statutes. So let's just say that's like 100,000 pages. It maybe not quite that. Let's say 10,000 pages. Then you have federal regulation. That definitely is a couple 100,000 pages. And then, in order to understand the application of all that, you have to read case law, which is probably a couple million pages, or spread over 150 years, or more, depending on what jurisdiction you're in. And then you have your state law, which has the exact same system on top of all that. So you have, of course, the state constitution, and then you have the state statutes, and then you have the state regulations, and then you have the state case law that basically interprets all that. And you have such a complex, convoluted system that nobody understands the way it works. But it's actually quite simple if you remove the commerce sections of the Constitution. If you remove the government's contracts that they try to entice you and entrap you into, the Constitution is very simple. You are free to do as you please as long as you don't injure another party. Very, very simple.
social contract. Yeah, I find with a real House of Cards ideology like this, a question often looks a lot like a gun pointed at you. You know, it's really threatening when people know. I think, like Larkin said earlier in the show, it's subconscious. And when that starts being drawn out of people through that kind of inquisitive process, yes, the reaction, of course, is emotional, because this is a religious belief. And it also, there's other things tied to it, like, wow, people, I've been fooled, I've been wrong, people have been lying to me my entire life. It's a lot to process all at once, and for most people, I don't think it can happen all at once.
It's very emotionally difficult to get through that period. Like,
Absolutely.
to admit, like, you know, even if the only stumbling block for you is pride, that's a big stumbling block, to admit that you were duped.
Sure.
You know?
Yep. And because the belief in government is inherently self-contradictory, all it takes is a few questions, and there's actually a bunch of different lines of questioning that show the contradiction. And so, when you can do it, and it's pretty easy, there's a few different ways to lead a statist to the point where he's saying two diametrically opposed things, and the other guy doesn't have to say anything. Just wait. You just said two things that totally don't match.
Yeah.
I haven't even said what I think yet.
You really
and
just
then
have
they start to get emotional.
Yeah, you really just have to wait. They'll just keep piling more contradictions. The more logical truths you expose them to, the more contradictions they're going to pile on, because contradictions are the only thing that can explain it away.
Right.
And
Which is why it takes.
Go ahead, Andrew.
Well, I really like that you said logical, because it really goes hand in hand with kind of the way I've kind of drawn the solution out to some folks of learning how to decode a lot of the rhetoric that we come in contact with. You know, it's grammar, logic, and rhetoric. These three things are very essential in determining the nature of what we're being exposed to. I'm a big fan of Mark Stevens. I've done a lot of research on Mark Stevens and his line of questioning, and I find it just flawless in the way he deals with these bureaucrats who really have no recourse except to say, get the hell out of here, or we're going to have problems. And again, the gun in the room. But it's I really think that, I guess my whole point is that we really need to take a solid look at the reality of our history. There's a book out there. I don't know if any of you gentlemen have read it, but there's Con of the Constitution.
Con of the Constitution?
Yeah.
I've heard of it. I think I've read some of it, but I don't remember. I've read a ton of pieces of things.
Yeah,
Right.
Well, it's a book that really goes into very specific detail about the background of the individuals that put pen to paper, or parchment, or hemp in this case. But in this scenario, what they're doing is showing the background motives and how these so-called Federalists were able to infiltrate the true patriots. I mean, the true patriots, such as Thomas Jefferson, Patrick Henry, Patrick Henry was quoted as not even attending the Constitutional Convention because he was said to say, "I smell a rat." And he was absolutely right. Most people don't realize that we actually had 9 sitting presidents under the Articles of Confederation prior to the Constitutional Convention.
Yeah, and most people aren't taught that a lot of the founders that we revere thought the Constitution was a bad idea and recognized the problem inherent in it.
And, I guess the whole thing is he who won the war has gradualistically rewrote the history books. Another thing that I like to tell people about is, if you take a look at the actual term federal, what does it mean? Most people think, anything that has to pertain to government, right? Well, no, it's actually a contract.
So, Andrew,
Start off by understanding government by realizing it's a contract, and the whole thing starts